Hello viewers, welcome to another video in the How to Improve Your Memory series. If you haven't seen all the earlier videos, go back and watch them. Otherwise, on its own, this video won't make a lot of sense. So as an example of something that a student might be studying, I'll look at the economic axiom of local non-satiation. So we say that preferences are locally non-satiated if for any x and any positive epsilon, there exists a y such that epsilon is bigger than the distance between x and y, and also y is better than x. In order to memorize that definition, we'll use a memory palace, which we saw in the previous episode. We'll also be using some basic memory techniques which were introduced in the episodes before that one. So let's start with those two words, local non-satiation. So local is not a very visual word. Remember, we want to make things very visual with our memory techniques. Now local does contain Cal, which is often short for California. So I'll think of the shape of the state of California on a map. It's a very distinctive shape. Non-satiated. That reminds me of a cat on the internet who's famous for being pretty much always hungry. He's never satisfied no matter how much food he's had. He's always wanting more. So I'll imagine that cat eating the lower half of California. Low for local. I'm going to put that visual inside my memory palace. So let's go to the memory palace I introduced in the previous video and do that. So I had this table in Binghamton University Library, so I'll put those first visuals on there. So let's imagine the cat standing over here and it's eating California and crumbs of it are falling over the table and bouncing off the floor. So that's a very visual way to remember it. So we got the first part of the definition down. Now, one thing I should add, memory is always a little bit personal. So things that I think of when I hear local and non-satiation might be different from what you think about when you hear those same phrases. So if the word local reminds you of something else, use that instead. Or if the word non-satiation has a different association in your mind, use that visual instead. Visuals that are logical in your own experience are better than ones that make sense to me if you're the one trying to remember this. So take a moment to pause the video if you have to, just to visualize the cat eating California or whatever else you're using to remember the words local non-satiation. Alright, let's go on to the next part of the definition. For any x, so for FOR is not very visual. However, it sounds the same as the number 4. I have a whole memory system for numbers. When I think of the number 4, I think of George Bush. That association makes sense because he was re-elected in 2004. The word any is also not very visual, but you can twist it a bit. It sounds very similar to Amy, and it's a pretty good chance there's someone in your life named Amy. X looks like a pair of scissors, so I use scissors for X. So we have George Bush, Amy, and scissors. Let's go put that in the next location in our memory palace. So here's the second location. Now, one thing I said earlier, you want to make your images wildly unusual to make them more vivid and more memorable. If you just imagine Bush cutting Amy's hair, that's not a terribly unusual thing to see. There's a good chance you'll forget that. So here's a better way to remember it. Let's say Amy has a really big pair of scissors, and she's using a really big and really strong scissors to actually cut open this concrete wall. And then Bush is horrified seeing the wall being torn up, and he's trying to stop her. If you were to see something like that unfold before your eyes, that's a scene that you are unlikely to forget. So again, pause the video if you have to. Just visualize Bush trying to stop Amy from cutting the wall open with her massive scissors. Next part of our definition, and any epsilon greater than 0. So we already said Annie is Amy. Epsilon, that's a Greek letter. Lots of fraternities and sororities use Greek letters like epsilon in their names. So think of someone you know who's part of a fraternity or used to be part of a fraternity or a sorority. The mathematical greater is not very visual, but has the same sound as a grater, which you use to grate cheese or something like that. So think of a cheese grater. In my memory system, I think of a grand piano. Whenever I see a number 0, that association makes sense to me. If you think of something else, when you hear the number 0, use that instead. So we have Amy, fraternity student, cheese grater, grand piano. So we have Amy and the fraternity student are using this grater to shred up a grand piano, and you see bits of wood falling over the floor and getting all over the place and making this huge mess. So that's a way to make that part of the definition very memorable. Again, pause the video if you have to, just to dwell on that image in your mind. Next part, there exists Y, such that. So exist, not very visual, but it sounds similar to exit. So think of an exit sign. So you know in a building they have these fire exits for emergencies. So you know what those signs look like. For the letter Y, I think of a slingshot because they have the same shape. So we have slingshot and exit sign. Let's put that in the next location on these stairs. So someone's got a slingshot. We've got an exit sign that's slingshot. Once they release the slingshot, the exit sign goes into the wall and makes a big hole. You see also debris falling all over the place. Again, we're trying to make things as wildly unusual as possible to make them more memorable. So just visualize that in your mind for a moment. Epsilon has to be greater than the distance between X and Y. So we already said epsilon was a fraternity or sorority student. Greater is a cheese grater. For distance, I'm going to use a measuring stick or measuring tape, whichever one makes more sense for you. We already said X was scissors and Y was slingshot. So let's go put that in the next location. So here is the 5th location in that memory palace. So we have the fraternity or sorority student, and they have a grater, and they're using that grater to shred up a measuring stick or measuring tape, and see the crumbs falling on the table and they're bouncing on the floor. And you also have the slingshot firing the scissors, and the scissors are going into this cushion over here, and those scissors are cutting up the cushion. You see bits of foam flying over the place, and they're also bouncing the floor, bouncing out this window and causing the window to shatter. So something unusual like that is more memorable. Take a moment to pause the video if you have to, just to see that in your mind's eye. All right, very last part. And Y is preferred to X. So Y is slingshot. We said X was scissors. Preferred. I think of a cat because cats have fur. Preferred fur. Can you tell I like cats? It'd probably be better, to make sure we don't forget this, if I get a long-haired cat. So a cat has a lot of fur. And we'll use that. So we have slingshot, long-haired cat, and scissors. So to make that very unusual and visual, let's say someone's putting a cat in the slingshot, and the cat's got a pair of scissors between their paws. So when the slingshot is released, the cat goes flying into this screen over here, and the scissors come first. So the scissors end up cutting up the whole screen. You see bits of glass just flying over the place and getting everywhere. It's very messy, and someone's going to have a very big cleanup job to do when it's all done. So that's the definition. Now, it always helps to review a bit, so let's just recap this very, very quickly. So Over here we had California being eaten by the insatiable cat, local NonSatiation. Then we had Bush trying to stop Amy from climbing up the wall, so for any X. And then we had the fraternity student with the cheese grater. He's going to have to grind up a grand piano over here. And then we had the slingshot with the exit sign, and exit sign was going through this wall over here. And then we had the fraternity student using the grater to shred up some measuring tape on this table. And then we also had the scissors in the slingshot, and the scissors were being slung into the cushion and cutting up the cushion. And lastly, you had a cat in the slingshot, and the cat had a pair of scissors, and the cat was cutting up this screen. So one thing that's important to know for long-term recall, because you don't want to just learn and forget it, you want to learn it one day and then still have it with you in your memory when you're taking the exam. I often find that I forget a lot after the first night. It seems like going to sleep somehow resets my memory. However, if I then review the memory palace the next day, that seems to cement it in my memory more long-term. If you're a beginner and you're watching this video, you have to do it more than once because you're not accustomed to making these kind of wildly unusual visuals, and you just need some more practice to get proficient with it.
Now, of course, all students know that if you just memorize something without understanding what you memorized, you're probably not going to do very well on the test. So let's make sure you understand what local non-satiation really means. So for any x, I'll just pick up x around here, but again, it could be any x, it could be anywhere in this graph. So distance less than epsilon, so let's say epsilon is this far. So anything within epsilon is going to be in this circle. So there's always going to be some y in that circle. Some y that's nearby, no matter how big or how small that circle is. There's always some y that is better than x. So it doesn't matter where x is, doesn't matter how big or how small epsilon is, there's always going to be some y that's similar to x but better. That's one way you can think about it in a very simple way. No matter how much or how little you have, there's always something similar that's more desirable. Now, possible objection from the audience. So it took us a video that's more than 10 minutes long to memorize one definition. Couldn't you just use no memory techniques, just memorize the same way people usually do and memorize it faster? Well, if you're just trying to learn one definition, yes, natural memory beats trained memory for small things. The problem, though, with your natural memory is that your natural memory doesn't scale up very well. I'll use an example. So let's say you're memorizing a deck of cards, something you do in competitions. So try to memorize one card in 1 second. You do that pretty easily. Even 2 cards in 2 seconds, very easy. Could you keep up that pace for a full deck of 52 cards and memorize all that in 52 seconds? Probably not. So your natural memory doesn't scale up very well. You can recall a handful of things pretty easily, but trying to memorize something for an entire final exam or memorize an entire deck of cards, that's something that's going to be very painful for your natural memory, or even just beyond the grasp of your natural memory. So your trained memory can scale up much more easily. To remember just one definition, trained memory is kind of slow. But if you're trying to memorize a lot of stuff for a big test, then memory techniques are the way to go. Another important thing about studying and memory, A lot of educators try to say that memory is not important. Students, of course, know that's not true. I think of memory as being a way to pin down all the little details. So now that you can memorize the definition of local non-satiation easily, now you're free to focus on the big concepts and make sure you know what local non-satiation actually means. So human minds are pretty good at getting the general concept, but we're terrible at all those tiny details. If you got the tiny details taken care of, now you can focus on your strengths and you won't miss anything. So for maybe like a small weekly quiz, natural memory might be more efficient because there's not a whole lot to memorize for a weekly quiz. But for something big, you want your memory techniques to help you out. So that wraps up this episode on how to study. Be sure to tune in for our next episode and we'll learn more about some applications of memory techniques. Take care.